There was something else that happened, Matt, and it's a momentous moment for the world, really. Lex finally got to interview Zelensky. He'd promised that he would. He'd made annoying tweets on Twitter about, his good intentions and how he was being unfairly treated by the brain mobs. I actually did a breakdown of a very self-serving tweet thread that he released before this interview. I'll link it in the show notes. Just analyzing all of the broken, wounded bird techniques that he managed to squish into a single, couple of tweets. It was quite remarkable. He had them all. He had them all there. But now the actual interview has happened, right? And on the one hand, I will say, I think this has been quite bad for Lex because, yes, he's got a popular podcast. He receives criticism. He moderates his Reddit with an iron fist. But, he's still relatively niche. He isn't as well known as somebody like Joe Rogan or that kind of thing, and he still kind of has the association of that he's about tech and science and this kind of thing. But here, because he's interviewing a world leader in an ongoing conflict, there was a lot more attention paid to him by, people that weren't familiar, who looked critically into his, comments that he'd made and this whole shtick, and basically pointed out a whole bunch of stuff like that. He seems to have a very strong sympathy for Putin's narratives, right? Like when Navalny was killed, he floated is it possibly Ukraine or Biden? Who could be responsible for Navalny being poisoned in a Russian prison?
He's just an open-minded guy. He's open-minded. He's he's just considering all the possibilities. Yeah.
And then he tweeted out, of course, that he wanted to conduct the interview in Russian. He needed to tweet that out, right? Not communicate it in private, because why would you do that? In any case, that does come up in the interview at the start. And, Zelensky tries to explain to Lex the relevant context, the geopolitical context, and why he will not be conducting the interview in Russian. And Lex makes his case for why he's going to speak Russian and English. So Zelensky's response is in Ukrainian and English, and it's AI translated at times, if you listen to the podcast version. So that's why in these clips, Zelensky will sound a little odd, and Lex as well at times, right? But in case you were wondering, Matt, does Lex get in some acknowledgement of Joe Rogan? Of course. Don't worry. You need not have worried. Let's hear that.
Well, when you come and visit me in Texas as a guest for the third time.
With pleasure.
Let's do this. How about you, my friend Joe Rogan, and I will go get some Texas barbecue together?
Who will pay?
That's a good question.
Putin. For everything. He has to pay.
Well, yes, we'll invite him too.
No.
Okay.
Without him.
Okay, I get it. Understood.
But if the Rome Statute will be accepted by your government before this moment.
Okay. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but Joe has a great comedy club in Austin.
Joe Rogan?
Joe Rogan, yes. And I think that as a person who respects comedy and stand-up comedy, it would be interesting for you to have a look at it.
No. I know him, and I saw a lot of different videos. He's a very talented person. So it would be a pleasure if you invite me and I'm able to do it. I am a little bit busy.
Yeah.
But if I'll be in the United States, I hope that I will have a conversation and a meeting with President Trump. And of course, during my visit, if I'll have the time, it would be a pleasure if you'll invite me. With pleasure.
You know what? I will pay.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awkward. Yeah, it's just so absurd, isn't it? You're talking to a wartime president, and it's meant to be about an incredibly serious situation. And say, hey, we'll go hang out, you and me, and Joe Rogan. So, yep, that's good. He managed to get in some praise of Rogan.
He got in a plug, Joe Rogan's Comedy Club, and he tried to connect it, you could see it as just like a human moment, but it's not random, right? It's always plugging Joe Rogan, what a good guy he is, and all this kind of thing. And Rogan, remember Rogan was just recently saying, fuck you, Zelensky. Right? Remember that? Like,
Oh,
it was the
yeah,
viral
that's right.
thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course. And it hurts me because Zelensky has to be diplomatic here, right? The whole reason
Yeah.
he's on this podcast is because he knows he has to reach out to the new administration, and the administration's constituency, which includes Lex and Rogan and that
Yes.
part of the audience. And he has to do what he's doing, which is be polite, even in the face of utterly inane
Yes.
questions and proposals.
And he does thread that needle of like, appealing to Trump, right? Like he praises him. He talks about how, he's a impressive leader and all this, and that he thinks they will get on. And, like he says all the things he has to, but Lex treats it like he's able to give his true opinion, which obviously he isn't, right? And in the same respect, he asks him about Elon Musk and Trump. So if you thought, you were worried, Matt, like obviously Trump will come up, right? But will Elon Musk? Yes, Elon Musk will come up.
There is a perception of corruption. People like Donald Trump and Elon Musk really care about fighting corruption. What can you say to them to gain their trust that the money is going towards this fight for freedom, towards the war effort?
Just that framing, Matt, that Elon Musk and Trump really care about corruption. Trump, like the most corrupt president in recent history. Like Lex is such a sniveling little lick spittle.
Yeah, and it's also implicit that, this stupid MAGA talking point that, large amounts of the aid is getting, wasted and stolen through corruption. So that's the kind of slightly insulting kind of framing that he's happy to pose to Zelensky. I mean, you can imagine that if he ever gets, like if he's interviewing Putin, there is no way he's going to ask difficult questions like, well, how exactly did so many of your political opponents die? Right? How many Russian soldiers exactly have died in Ukraine? Questions. I mean, there's any number of questions you could ask Putin that would be insulting to him, and make him angry. And that Lex would never do it in a million years.
No, he won't. And so Zelensky here does give a good answer about it. He talks about, like he answers it in a diplomatic way as he can, saying, that there aren't these issues with corruption that are being claimed. Like, of course there are in the country in general, but like in the wartime, like people are busy fighting the war. And when they catch people, if there is any like level of corruption or whatnot, the people are punished very severely. But actually, this is a case where the AI translation messes up, because he talked about like hitting them on the hand, which is an expression in Ukrainian, and it was translated as he gives them a slap on the wrist. Right. And then this went around, like kind of MAGA Russia bot Twitter to like promote that, oh, look, he's actually on board with corruption.
So that's very sloppy on Lex's part. Should have picked that up.
That's very bad, but like seems to have been a genuine error, because I think he did go about fixing it. But like, so, they're talking like that in general, but like Matt here, for example, Lex asks this question.
I mentioned Elon Musk. I would be interested to hear what you think of him, why you respect him as a person, as an engineer, as an innovator, as a businessman. I would just like to hear from you. What do you think about Elon Musk?
Again, the framing. like Musk, what a guy. He dazzles me. He rocks my world. I've got a great big warm feeling in my boner for him. Talk to me about how much you love him too. Like, what's wrong with you? And why would you ask the president of Ukraine about Elon Musk? Like, how much you love Elon Musk. It's just, what's the point?
Well, so Matt, but you also have to factor in here that Starlink, right?
Yeah.
Zelensky still needs access to Starlink, right?
Of course.
So of course his answer is, oh yeah, Elon Musk. Yeah. Yes, I've talked to him. He's I
have a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, and he provides Starlink, and this is very important for us. And you're just like, Lex, he can't tell you that he thinks Musk is a dickhead.
Yeah,
Right?
he's got a gun to his head and Lex is oblivious, or it's just that directed obliviousness.
So Zelensky is talking about, Lex is constantly saying, I have a dream. My dream is peace. Can we have peace? Why don't you want peace? All this kind of thing, right? And Zelensky is constantly explaining to Lex patiently that it's Putin that's the problem, right? Because he's the one that invaded. And also they can't have peace because there's no security guarantee. And he talks about, Putin reneging on previous peace agreements. But Lex poses, after talking about, the necessary security guarantees that Ukraine would need for a ceasefire, Lex poses this important question.
Many people respect and love you in America. Trump respects you.
Loves me?
Oh, come on now. Remember last time you corrected me? When I said that you love Javier Milei, you said, no, I respect him. So let's not talk about love today. But could we talk seriously about guaranteeing Russia's security?
Okay, can I interview you a little? Question is, what land is the war happening on? And where did it start? On our soil, on our territory. International law was violated. The sovereignty of our country was violated. Civilians were killed. Tens of thousands of our people were taken hostage. And everyone will tell you this happened. This is what happened. When I speak with the Global South, which is trying to balance the two sides because of the history, because of their roots, and because of their shared economic interests with Russia in the past. And now, of course, when you talk to them, they are speaking a little bit like you. I mean, they're balancing a little bit, Yeah, a little bit in between, but we will work on it.
Yeah.
It's our first meeting. During the second one, you will be more on our side.
Yeah.
But it's just
You're very convincing.
We will see.
Very charismatic.
Yeah, thank you. But when I speak with them, it's very important. Even with their balancing attitude towards the war, they all recognize that this is a war. This is not just internal conflict. This is a full-scale war that Putin began. And all of them, if you talk to them, they say, but then they all recognize that it's his own big mistake, Putin's mistake, and that he's not right.
Yeah. This is where Lex's childish naivety is just so infuriating because, that positioning, it sounds nice. Oh, there's just hasn't been enough love. There's maybe been misunderstandings. Maybe we're just putting you and Putin in a room together and you could talk together as men and realize that you're both just human beings and you can work it all out. That, and, asking Ukraine for security guarantees about Russia, this sort of utterly stupid both sides ism that he does, it is just so infuriating because it is absolutely out of touch with reality. I don't know how someone like Zelensky stays calm. Just the insulting premise of the question that Ukraine, that Russia has been under some kind of existential threat from Ukraine. And therefore, in order for them to stop invading Ukraine in this ghastly war, Ukraine needs to do something to make Russia feel safer.
Yeah.
And fuck off. Fuck off.
I know.
I hate him so much.
He does at some points talk about, the followers who have lost their children or mothers and, young kids being stolen and all this, and kind of point to Lex that you have to understand that's what we're happening and that's what we're talking about. Yeah. Right. But you talked about Lex being, kind of naive and in some sense, strategically naive, right? He's naive in a particular way. But listen to this suggestion, Matt. So maybe you've got him wrong. Lex knows a lot about this area, so he's got a possible compromise.
And you have to begin from this. If you begin at the middle, between Ukraine and Russia, of course, we can speak like this. You are in the middle and say, okay, what's going on? There is a fight. Where is the fight? It's not the fight like in Europe, when Napoleon is fighting against somebody in the middle of Europe. No, this is not in the middle of somewhere of the planet, not the planet. It's concretely on our land. So one country with one army, one person came to another. That's it. It's very clear.
Again, I would like us to find a path to peace. So let us nevertheless try to start in the middle. What other ideas do you think might? You are a very intelligent person. And
Your Russian isn't that good either.
Huh.
And I told you
yes,
that this is only our first meeting.
my English is not very good either.
Your English is very good.
Thank you. To be honest, I'm terrible at speaking in every language. Well, there are other ideas. For instance, sorry to say this, it sounds crazy,
Please.
but what if both Ukraine and Russia are accepted into NATO?
Putin himself spoke about Russia, maybe about NATO.
So this is Lex Fridman's proposal. Maybe Ukraine and Russia are accepted into NATO. How's that for an out-of-the-box suggestion, Chris? I bet you didn't think of that one before.
No, I didn't. I don't think anyone has seriously contended with that suggestion.
I think Putin might be surprised at that suggestion. Oh my God. This is why Lex is a bit of a mystery, isn't he? Because on one hand, he's incredibly successful. He gets all of these huge guests. He has a massive audience. He sounds like an infant. He is correct when he says that he's terrible in speaking in Russian and in English. And yes, he does have this strategic, and he has his sympathies, and he has his hero worship of Musk and Rogan and so on. But at the same time, anyone who proposes things like, hey, what about if Ukraine and Russia join NATO, then everyone could feel secure and happy. That is such a dumb suggestion that it makes me wonder about Lex. Maybe he is exactly as stupid as he appears.
Well, that's understandable. And I also like that Zelensky, dinged him about because he was speaking Russian right at that point. And Zelensky said, your Russian isn't that fluent. And
Isn't
then
that good?
said, oh, I'm not good at English. He's like, no, your English is fine. So which means because if the claim is we need to speak in Russian because we could communicate fluently, that's a ding, right? And
that's a ding. I know. That's right. Because the whole premise. Because that's the premise. What value add does Lex bring to this topic? Why is he, a good person to be talking about this and sorting this out between him and Putin, which is how he's to position himself for a while now. And presumably it's because of this deep affinity, including language. And, language is the thing that he sort of leans on. But yeah, if his Russian isn't that good, then that's bullshit as well.
Well, they point people, Russian speakers that have listened have said Lex's Russian is good, as somebody that hasn't been living in Russia, but it's noticeably not that of somebody that's comfortable in the language, right? It's like the language of somebody that left when they were 10 or that kind of thing and haven't been using it.
Understandably, yeah.
Yeah,
So
which is still good, but you don't
that's right.
describe yourself as fluent.
But yeah, the point is not to ding his Russian whatever proficiency is, but the point is the whole premise of him insisting of doing the interview in Russian, which was insulting to Zelensky and was a dumb suggestion to begin with, was I think for him to make it special, to make his contribution special somehow, and there was no basis to that either.
He does these framing bits around as well where he suggests the reason he kind of heads off this criticism by saying he might sound not particularly good in Russian, but it's because the Russian language is so dense and his ideas are there's so many literary things that he could reference or whatnot. So
he's thinking about Dostoevsky too much, and that interferes with his fluency probably.
And a Ukrainian commentator or an online activist, Anna, who is associated with Destiny's community, she was commenting that this is a common trope about kind of Russian nationalism about the language being so
deep and beautiful.
It's actually better to listen to films in dubbed Russian because it's got more nuance. So in any case, Lex does that thing about framing it that just in case you thought that comment is disparaging, like he heads that off in the framing of it. And you mentioned, Matt, about like, unrealistic, but actually quite harmful kind of things that Lex focuses on. And listen to this line of questioning.
When do you think you'll hold elections? Because for people who don't know, part of the martial law, elections were suspended and they were delayed and delayed and delayed. And I think the next sort of plan is in February of 2025. But when do you think there will be presidential elections in Ukraine?
Elections were postponed once. They were not delayed, to be clear. Elections did not take place in 2024. That year, first of all, we need to understand the Constitution. They were scheduled to be held in the spring of 2024. Due to martial law, under the Constitution, you cannot do this. These are the presidential elections. The parliamentary elections did not take place in the fall of 2024, according to the Constitution. Yes, there are security things. There is the Constitution, but there are security things. That is, everyone in Ukraine understands that this cannot be done until the war is over or legislation needs to be changed. I believe that elections will take place immediately after the end of martial law. This is according to the law, or members of the parliament need to get together and change legislation, which will be very difficult to do because society is against it. Why is society against it? It is understandable why, because we want elections that we want to trust. 8.5 million people went abroad. The infrastructure needs to be created for these millions of people to vote. Millions of people in the occupied territories. I'm not even talking about the occupation of 2014. I'm talking about the occupation right now. What to do with these people? This is a difficult question. And one of the most unfair ones is how to vote without having 1 million soldiers. It is impossible.
Lex is kind of bringing up, again, a kind of right-wing conspiratorial talking point that like Zelensky is a dictator, right? He's anti-democratic and all this kind of thing because he's not holding elections in the middle of our ongoing war. And Zelensky is, bringing up like, but Lex, consider that there are currently, like, where are people going to vote? Like when there's bombs going off, when there's parts of the countries, like it's such a stupid question. And he goes on with this, Matt, to ask about like his potential, like in future presidential debates, who he will debate and his tactics in those. And the guy, like Zelensky's like, I'm not thinking about any of that because we're fighting a war. After the war, yes, we'll consider all these things, but like we're in a war. But Lex, so he's just doing that thing of relaying that talking point that like it's anti-democratic with no seeming like grasp about Lex, they're at war. They're not like playing like dress up or something like.
Yeah, and there's also legislative like.
Yeah,
like
and it's martial.
Like,
there hasn't been the normal parliamentary processes.
Yeah, because that's how their constitution works. It's what's written. If you want to have an election, you'd actually have to pass legislation to blah, blah, blah. There's technical reasons, but there's also the incredibly important pragmatic reasons. But, like Lex could have checked any of that stuff. Like he could have read something about that.
Well, Matt, on that subject, just to be clear, Lex also, like I said, he does these framing things around it. And of course, he does the thing about talking about how he's all about love and, his commitment to peace and all this kind of thing. But he also wants to emphasize some other things. And he emphasizes this kind of thing.
A lot of this comes down to picking high signal sources, whether it's blogs, books, podcasts, YouTube videos, X accounts, and so on. For this conversation with President Zelensky, for example, since February 2022, I've spoken with hundreds of people on the ground. I've read Kindle or audiobook about 10 books fully, and then I skimmed about 20 more. And I don't mean books about Zelensky, although he does appear in some of them. I mean books where this conversation was fully in the back of my mind as I'm reading the book. So, for example, I read Red Famine by Anna Applebaum. It's about Holodomor. Does it directly relate to Zelensky? Not on the surface, no, but it sort of continues to weave the fabric of my understanding of a people, of a history of the region. But it's really important for me to read books from various perspectives. And I'm always trying to calculate the bias under which the author operates and adjusting for that in my brain as I integrate the information. For example, Anne Applebaum's book, Gulag, is very different from Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. The former is a rigorous, comprehensive historical account. The latter is a literary, psychological, and personal portrait of Soviet society. Both, I think, are extremely valuable.
I think he goes on to imply that the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich is biased somehow, but he doesn't.
He does talk
why.
about but it is biased. There, like it's been criticized by like academic historians, but it's just repeating like a well-known thing that is like a popular book that's about Hitler, but has been criticized for like various historical inaccuracies in it.
Fine.
And it's part of the summary of Anne Applebaum. But the thing he wants to be clear, Matt, is he's read like 10 to 30 books in preparation for this interview, countless interviews. He studied their region. He knows, the deep history. And yet in this interview, he comes across like an absolute naive teenager with no grasp of the reality of the situation, no grasp of the political systems or that kind of thing. And he argues like in his framing that, he's got the kind of mind, he doesn't remember dates, he doesn't remember, but he integrates it all and he fully appreciates all the thing. And this is exactly what you talked about, giving the audience this kind of pseudo intellectualism about, that he's done so much deep reading and he's got such a deep understanding.
Yeah, well, he says he did it, so I guess, he must have.
If he did, he's shit. He's really shit.
I mean, if he really did look at all of those books, then none of it impinged his brain. I mean, like if he'd had a firm understanding of the Holodomor and the history of subjugation and colonialization of that area by Russia, then he might have been a bit more sympathetic to the current instantiation of it. Yeah, or if he'd seen any of the current Russian propaganda that's on Russian TV that touts the same thing, basically treating them as subhuman, as people that need to be crushed and dominated and so on. But his questions were about love. Maybe Putin and Zelensky need to.
He's got a dream, Matt. But also the thing is that there would have been value, or there is a way to present the Russian propaganda and give Zelensky the opportunity to address it, right? Like raise the criticisms, right? But without doing this kind of sleazy endorsement of it, right? Because you could say, look, Putin and critics in the US have accused you of being anti-democratic, and they've argued that, you not holding elections. Do you have a response to this?
That's right. You can ask the questions without implicitly endorsing the legitimacy of the question. I know this is where, we talked about this before years ago, but this is the problem in that you have proper journalists, trained journalists, right? Serious journalists who, they're still around. They still do interview heads of states. And I've listened to their interviews and they ask proper questions and they do it like that and they do proper research and they're not infantile, prepossessed, undeveloped human beings. So they have a certain maturity about them and they do a proper interview. And then you have Lex doing this kind of thing. Yeah. And I'm sorry. I apologize to Zelensky and to the people of Ukraine for, just having to talk to Lex. I'm sorry.
I do think this is bad for him, though, because Zelensky came across well. There were a couple of things that people could clip out, right? Like a slap in the wrist. But when he interviews Putin, if he is much more accommodating, and if Putin does what he usually does, just waffles on and goes on about, his grievances and whatnot, and doesn't come across personable, I think this will be bad for both Lex and Putin. because it will make the contrast very clear. Like Zelensky is someone that's quite a polished, media personality. He's media trained because he was an actor beforehand. So like he dealt with Lex well. He presented his case and cause well. And now the next is Putin. And like, like even Tucker Carlson's softball interview with Putin didn't go well, right? Like Putin looked like a blathering kind of dictator, right? Like, so almost like that's what he is. But, last thing, Matt, last clip for you. Maybe Lex, we're treating him unfairly because his critics, Matt, they're out there. They make it hard for him, but he can endure the slings and arrows, right? He'll do it for peace.
As I said, the Russian language is one that the president speaks fluently and was his primary language for most of his life. I speak Russian fluently as well. It's the only common language we are both fluent in. So any other combination of languages required an interpreter, including when I spoke English. He did need an interpreter when I spoke English. And just like I was visibly encumbered and annoyed by the process of interpretation. This is why I tried to speak in Russian to the president instead of English, so that he can directly understand me without an interpreter. I'm willing to take the hit for that, as I am for everything else. I'm not trying to protect myself. I'm trying to do whatever is best for the conversation, for understanding. Though it has been getting harder and harder to stay open, vulnerable, and raw in public, while the swarms of chanting internet mobs stop by with their torches and their color-coded hats, flags, frogs, pronouns, and hashtags.
Pronouns? Frogs? What?
Pepe.
Oh, Pepe. I see. Yeah, that's it. Well, I mean, he proposed everything just out of love, out of doing his best, and he knew he was going to get slammed for it. So he does look, if he looks like an idiot, it's just because he puts himself out there, Chris. He puts himself out there.
Yeah. No legitimate criticism of him. It's all just polemical, like swarms of bots and colored hat polemicists and whatnot. Like it's not anybody with any legitimate critiques of Lex. Never is. Doesn't exist.
No. All incredibly self-serving. Everything he says is just entirely... I do not care for that.
You, Matt.
I do not care for that man, Chris. Don't say that. It makes my skin crawl.
I know.